Hey there, welcome to the NBA DFS build. We're going to go over this, 5 or 6 game slate. We're going to go over this slate, hopefully help you to some winning picks. We're going to break down everything from ownership and projections and all that fun stuff, and hopefully point you in the right direction. If we help you out in any way, please smash that like button. Also consider subscribing to the channel. Let's not waste any time here. Let's go position by position. Starting at point guard, we got Luka Doncic coming in with a 56-point fantasy projection. The only issue here is he is not by himself today. There are two other guys with a projection over 51 fantasy points, LaMelo Ball and SGA. Ownership is very interesting here. Obviously, Jokic just got ruled out, so Jamal Murray is considerably cheaper than these guys, and he's coming in with a 45-point fantasy projection. Lots to like at point guard. Let's just start it off with Luka there. With no Wemby, with no Jokic, how interested in Luka are you on this slate?
I'm somewhat interested. They're pretty heavy favorites, which I think the line might imply that Luka will play. He's actually questionable, missing the last game with a knee injury or something. So if he's in, I have a little bit of interest. I think he could still play around 40 minutes, even in a game with blowout risk, because this is a tournament game and point differential matters. So it's possible. I think he's fine. The issue is he's just like really pricey. He hasn't been that great relative to his normal upside. We haven't seen an 80-point type of game from him so far. So, I assume that's coming at some point. I don't know if it'll be tonight. I don't think he's a priority because there is a ton to like at point guard, even on a relatively small slate. So Luka is not super on my radar, but I do like him if he's going to play at like 5% ownership. I think you can always make a case for that.
Yeah, on a slate where kind of Anthony Davis, maybe LeBron are looking like the only true studs worth paying up for, I'm not going to tell you can't or shouldn't play Luka. Short of predicting an 80-point fantasy explosion, which with Luka it's always on the table, especially against a team like the Pels. He just isn't the best play at his position, and he's not like the best play on the slate. So he's not a priority for me. If I lose because Luka goes off, so be it. LaMelo Ball has a projection 4 points fewer than Luka. Kyrie Irving is still there to kind of help keep Luka in check to a certain degree. And then SGA is also a way better play than Luka by the numbers. So I prefer one of those two guys if I'm going to spend up at point guard. But with the presence of Jamal Murray and no Jokic, I don't really see that as a necessity. I would rather go get Brow on this slate. I think he's the much better value. I'm pretty sure he has the best projection of the entire slate now that Jokic has been removed. So that's just where I'm at right now. I kind of hope ownership flocks to one of those top point guard spends because that's not where I want to go. But if SGA is going to be 5% owned, I'm definitely interested in that as a pivot away from LaMelo. You're only paying $800 more to get a little bit different and get basically the same projection. I think I'm just going to eat the Jamal Murray chalk personally at point guard. How are you feeling about Jamal?
Yeah, no Jokic. It's a very obvious play. I don't think that's going out on a limb. 8,300. He's quite a bit more expensive than it was like the first time this happened. I think he was 7,100. So you're paying more. Not a great spot against Memphis. They could lose pretty badly in this game in theory, but yeah, he's a great play. I think it helps that you can play him at shooting guard. If he was point guard only, I would have less interest, but the flexibility does make him more playable, especially because shooting guard is a pretty trash position on this slate.
Well, I'm not really that worried about Memphis necessarily. Obviously that could go that way, but Edey's out, Morant is out, and Marcus Smart is questionable. So if Marcus Smart is also out, they really are lacking a lot of their defensive ceiling. So it suddenly doesn't look like that scary of a matchup to me. I know Memphis always plays pretty competitively regardless, but I just wouldn't look at that as a major issue. I think if the ownership on Murray gets out of control, the fact that his price is elevated 8.3K could get me a little bit interested in doing something different. But I don't know if I feel like that's the spot to get really different today, especially when, Donovan Mitchell is there at 9K and has like a, similar projection. Mitchell is interesting because he's coming in with no ownership on the road against the Celtics. So that is not completely out of play. Outside of these top guys at point guard, who else are you kind of considering?
You mentioned Mitchell. I really like that game in general, that Boston Cleveland game. I think that has like major shootout / overtime potential. The two best offenses in the league so far this season. Obviously good defensively as well, but I don't really think the ownership's going to be where it should be, even on a slate like this. So Mitchell looks pretty good. Garland, I don't mind. And then the Celtics guards, Holiday and White, are somewhat affordable. Holiday in particular, 5'2". As of now, I'm getting more Holiday than any other point guard on the slate, which is a little bit alarming, but I do think there's potential for the minutes to come up for the regulars, Holiday and Horford in particular. I just think this is a game that looks really good, and I think you should get some pieces of it, and correlating them on either side looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, I don't hate the logic there because when you look at narratives, both of these teams have something to prove. Obviously, you have the NBA Cup factor, but Cleveland has not lost yet, right? They're 15-0, so they're going into Boston, not only trying to extend that to 16-0, but to show everybody that the 15-0 is not nothing. We also can compete and beat Boston even in their, on their home court. On the flip side, Boston is 11-3. It's not like they're pushovers. They tend to historically be very tough to beat at home. And you better believe they want to send the message that, no, we are actually the best team in the East. So from that perspective, I can absolutely see this being a bit of a firestorm. It's hard because I really initially am gravitating towards the Lakers Jazz game and kind of loading up there. But as we've seen early on, that is going to be where a lot of ownership is flocking. So it's not like that's going to be contrarian. So I don't mind the contrarian approach of loading up on the first game of the night. Not probably what I'm going to do, but I like the logic there for tournaments. Elsewhere at point guard, Dennis Schroeder at 6.1K looks like a pretty nice, lower mid-range play, solid overall value against the Hornets. I really like Keontae George as a low-owned option in that Lakers Jazz game. Who'd you just mention that was really interesting? You said Drew Holiday. Yeah, I like Drew Holiday. I don't want a ton of exposure to the expensive guys in this first game, but Drew Holiday at 5.2K is interesting, especially with Peyton Pritchard questionable. And obviously we still don't have Porzingis for Boston. And then Jordan Clarkson at 5.2K in that last game of the night. He also is pretty interesting. I don't think there's anybody else. You could maybe look at Kason Wallace at 3.8, Jalen Noel at 4.5. Those guys are okay values for this slate. By the way, there's like no value so far on the slate, like true punts. So right now, those two guys do look like solid value plays. One other guy I'll mention is actually for the Cavs, Ty Jerome, mostly because Cleveland could be a little bit shorthanded. I feel like a couple big men are iffy for this game. And then you have Karis LeVert, who's also questionable. Not sure if that's been updated. But if he ends up being out, Ty Jerome off the bench could be a little bit interesting. I think he's like 4.2.
I guess you can do that.
I don't want to do that. I'm just saying right now, there's not crazy value that's obvious. So I think he's okay, Yeah.
I guess you can make a similar case for Cody Martin if Trey Mann is out, but
sure.
Cody Martin and the Cavs and the Hornets cheap guys are usually like horrible. So don't blame me if you don't want to do that. I think Westbrook is worth a mention just because he still has permanent upside and he's 5'5". I don't think it's a smash spot like it looked like. There was speculation he could start with Jokic out the other day. It didn't happen. It's Šarić instead, but I think Russ is fine at 5'5".
Yeah,
and
I think
D'Lo at 5'2" as well. I don't hate either.
Yeah, D'Lo's totally fine. I think right now my favorite guard, like punt value, is going to be Jalen Noel. Just because he's not carrying any ownership, carries a similar minutes projection as Kason Wallace, who is carrying ownership. So I think that's an interesting pivot away from a chalky value play. All right, over to shooting guard we go. Brandon Ingram leads the way with a 47-point fantasy projection. He is another reason why you don't necessarily have to go pay up for all those 10K plus guys, because he's pushing a 50-point fantasy projection and not getting that much ownership. That has everything to do with obviously the Lakers game and then Jamal Murray. But he is not overpriced for his role or his projection at this point. So he looks like a really good play if you can get to him. The matchup with Dallas is not ideal. And obviously that game has blowout risk. It's a 13-point spread. But as long as he's out there, Ingram is going to do most of the heavy lifting for the Pels. Right behind him is Jamal Murray, and then Donovan Mitchell, and then Jaylen Brown. All those guys are totally fine. Of that 4-pack of players, my preference is Jamal Murray. You do have to eat some chalk, when you play. And Jamal Murray looks like pretty good chalk to me.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about him. I understand that. I think Jaylen Brown is a really good play as well in that same game that I really like, 8,100, the Boston Cleveland game, of course. So I think he's strong. I think Ingram's a bit overpriced. I understand why you play him because the role he has with all the injuries is insane, but paying a premium, and I'm not loving that. I don't love the Pelican side of that game in general. I just think there are better spots to target on this slate. Otherwise, I'm kind of living in the mid range. If you get past Murray and Brown, it's guys like Brandon Miller, who looks okay. Schroeder's fine. Derek White, I mentioned liking quite a bit. Austin Reeves, it looks like the Lakers stars are going to be popular. I don't know if Reeves will be over 7K, but I think he's okay. The matchup with Utah is quite good. And then you mentioned, what's his name? Jordan Clarkson, a decent value. I think he's a little bit overowned as of now, just based on who he is and his projection. But I understand why you play him. I think a really strong tournament play is Cam Thomas. The Nets are going to be pretty popular for value, but I'm not sure Thomas is going to get a ton of that. He's projecting for some ownership, but he's been a little bit rough lately. The usage is always there. Scoring upside, Charlotte is a great matchup for them. So I think Cam Thomas, dollar for dollar, is probably my favorite shooting guard on the slate.
I love the Cam Thomas call. He is 6.9K. Obviously, a great matchup with the Hornets. Projection is not amazing. I think that could contribute to his ownership kind of staying in check. So he's pretty interesting. I will mention Christian Brown at 5.9K. He is carrying ownership. And I had mentioned last time we talked about a Nuggets slate that like no Jokic might negatively impact Brown. That really hasn't happened. He's been like rock solid in the last 3 games. So I have no problem going there if you want to spend a little bit over Jordan Clarkson. Don't mind Lou Dort at 4.8K. He's getting 30 to 35 minutes. Matchup with the Spurs isn't that bad. He is carrying ownership, though. Chalky Lou Dort isn't really something I want to do. So if he's going to be super owned, I probably will get away from that. Stephon Castle at 4.9K. He looks okay. There's looking like a lot of decent value here. Zaire Williams is probable at 3.9K. We can look at him as a pivot away from Cason Wallace, or just play him instead of Cason Wallace. Julian Strouder, 3.6. He's going to get 23, 25 minutes in this game. He looks like an okay value. My favorite one, though, assuming Rui Hachimura is still out, is going to be Dalton Connect at 4.5K. He went, like, it's not recency bias in the sense that I don't think he's going to do what he did last game again, but he's had 26 plus minutes in each of the last 3 games. He's been hitting his shots. He's been playing well. There's really no reason for them to not start him and play him at this point. He looks like he's ready to contribute. If Rui is in, I don't really want him. I think he's still in play if Rui is in, but if Rui is out, I think he's probably a core play for me.
Yeah, he's a little bit more expensive now. He's 4.5. I think he's fine if Rui's out, but certainly a fade if Rui's in.
Yep. All right, let's move it over to small forward. LeBron James leads the way with a 56-point fantasy projection. Right behind him is your boy, Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum is only $100 more expensive, and he only is coming in with 3 less fantasy points for his projection, and he's going to be less owned. So technically, Tatum is the better play for tournaments, just because you're going to have less exposure to him from the field, and you're taking this game in general. And if you want to go a little bit further down, Brandon Ingram looks like a better value than both of them if that game can stay close. He's had over 50 fantasy points in each of his last 2 games, so if he can keep doing that, 9.3K might be too cheap still for him, like I said before. One guy that I actually do not mind, and kind of, you get exposure to this Lakers Jazz game, which is what I kind of want to do. And then you can get leverage on what could be a chalky John Collins. I kind of like Lauri Markkanen here. 7K flat. His price has come down considerably. He's not exhibited a crazy good ceiling on the year, no doubt about that. But the Lakers are not a bad matchup, and he's kind of getting it going offensively lately. 25 real points 2 games ago. He's getting minutes again, 35 and 39 in his last 2 games. So if Lowry can start, popping off a bit more at 7K, I think he's a pretty interesting tournament play. He's not going to carry ownership.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I think Tatum is a good call as well as a pivot away from LeBron. If LeBron's going to be way more chalky, I don't really understand why at a similar salary.
Right.
The matchup's better for LeBron, but I really like this Celtics Cavs game. Like I've said, Tatum has plenty of ceiling of his own. and I think they're pretty similarly priced, $100 apart. So yeah, I think that's a good call. No qualms with the Markkanen thing. I don't think I would play him with Collins together in the same lineup if I'm hunting ceiling, but both look pretty good in the same 7K range. Don't mind that. Let's see. Trey Murphy looks like a pretty good value. His minutes should keep coming up. The Pelicans have nobody except for Brandon Ingram, essentially. So Murphy should get usage. Probably too cheap for the role. Looks like he'll be popular as a result, but I think it's justified. I think MPJ is okay, but a little bit pricey at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do not mind him though, because right now he's not he's not carrying ownership because his price has come up, and there are so many other good options. So if MPJ is not going to be owned, I will have interest in MPJ. So that is interesting. As far as values, yeah, I like the Trey Murphy call. 5.6K is a little bit too cheap for him with his minutes ticking up.
Connect. Not a lot of great value here. It's like the Nets and the Thunder. Like, I don't love those guys. I would definitely not play more than two of those cheap Nets, like Zaire Williams and Ben Simmons and guys like that in the same lineup. Dorian Finney-Smith. Looks like they're going to be somewhat popular, so I don't mind coming in under on that. It's a pretty shaky, chalky situation.
No, I don't. I don't really want to play a bunch of Nets. I think I'd rather just pivot to Connect, but I think I might not be alone if Rui ends up getting ruled out. So we'll see how that plays out in terms of ownership. By the way, Cam Johnson, though, is he going to be owned? A little bit, but he's been really good. He's been playing really well. He's getting good minutes, about 35 minutes a game lately. So if people are going to go to the cheaper Nets, I don't mind sticking right around 5.6 and going with Cam. He looks like a pretty good value.
Yeah, I didn't realize it, but I have more Cam Johnson than any other small forward as of now. At least
he's a good play
in the small forward position. He's the same price as Murphy, and I think Murphy might be the more popular of the two. So I don't hate that, especially if you're looking to get away from the cheaper Nets who are going to be more chalky.
Yeah, you got Murphy probably doesn't have a big minutes restriction going forward, but way worse matchup against Dallas, and Cam Johnson's against the Hornets. That feels way better to me. So yeah, just gonna have to keep an eye on what else opens up and where ownership is at, because like Lou Dort 20%, Trey Murphy 25%. I will go right in the middle there with Cam Johnson at 25. Before we move on to power forward, any interest in the likes of Keldon Johnson or Champagnie with Wemby being out?
Not really. The Spurs are pretty deep on bodies still, even without Wemby and Sohan. What was it? I think there was anyone projected for 30 minutes? No. They don't have a single guy projected for 30 minutes. So I
think Stephon Castle might be your best bet at 29.
Yeah.
So if I'm going for value for the Spurs, there's one guy in particular who I want, and we'll talk about him in a second. But then second will be Stephon Castle. I think he looks pretty good.
Yeah, but the forwards like Champagnie, I don't know. I don't see the need.
I think they're fine. They look like good tournament plays. They're not carrying a lot of ownership, I don't think. So I don't have a problem with them.
Also, like that's the best defense in the league they're playing. So there are a lot of ways that can go wrong.
That's very true. I don't want a ton of exposure to the Spurs except for one guy. Anyways, let's kick it over to power forward. We already talked about most of these guys. You said you kind of like Evan Mobley being a little bit overlooked. That game in general, Cavs versus Celtics. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 7.9K against a Jokic-less Nuggets. He looks pretty good. Projection feels a little bit light, all things considered, but Desmond Bane is back, so maybe that plays into it. We talked about mostly everybody here. Peyton Watson looks really good, like a good value at 5.6K. Obviously, no Aaron Gordon as well for Denver. If I'm going to target Nuggets, I think I'll let the price and ownership, sway me a little bit. I don't mind eating the Jamal Murray chalk just because he has the ball in his hands so much. I don't mind being underweight on MPJ because he's pretty scoring dependent usually. But guys like Brown at 5.9 and Peyton Watson, they're just really good prices for the roles they're going to have with those two key guys out for Denver.
Yeah, I'm getting to more Cam Johnson at the same price. I just think he has a higher ceiling and probably a better floor than Watson. And he's not out of control owned. Like Watson's probably going to be lower owned than Johnson, but I just like the Johnson spot a lot more. Trey Murphy, we mentioned here. Miles Bridges is probably on a minutes limit, but he's also only 6,300. I think that's worth noting. I think you can play him in a tournament and hope the minutes come up a little bit for him. That's just really cheap for Miles Bridges, who's like an 8K guy when he's at full strength. So don't hate that. Markkanen, Mobley, John Collins, they're all fine. Finney Smith, power forward only. He's very unexciting and probably doesn't have much of a ceiling, but he's 4-1 against Charlotte. So I think that's okay. Yeah, that probably covers it. There's a lot of the same stuff at small forward and power forward.
By the way, I will mention if Rui is in, I don't mind him at 5.1K either. It's possible he'd be limited with an ankle injury and all. But if he's in, he looks like a solid value, but getting really, really good run for the Lakers. And obviously the Jazz are an amazing spot.
He's questionable. That game starts at 7:30 local time, 10:30 Eastern.
Yeah, it's an hour after the last previous game starts.
And the Nets game where you have your pivots from Connect are 3 hours ahead of that. So I don't think people are going to be able to pivot to Connect if that's a thing that happens. So plugging Rui in at forward and then just pivoting down to Connect, I think is something you can definitely consider.
Yeah, and then if you want to kind of use that same strategy with LeBron or Brow to close things out, I mean, I'm going to be kind of stacking that game to a certain degree. I'm probably going to get like 4 or 5 guys from that game. I just think it's the best environment of the night, assuming it stays close. So that's literally what I'm going to end up doing. All right, I think that clears it up for power forward. Let's go over to center. Anthony Davis does come in with the best projection overall. Naturally, the best projection at center. He looks amazing against the Jazz. Don't need a big sales pitch, but when I kick it back over to you, just give me your thoughts on how much Anthony Davis is too much Anthony Davis. Right under him is Jalen Williams. Massive savings there for a guy who's going to get almost a 45-point fantasy projection. He looks awesome as usual against the Spurs. Question is that game going to stay close enough for him to hit? And then you have Evan Mobley, John Collins, Jarrett Allen, right all in the same range. But John Collins does appear to be the best value up top at center. And then I'll also mention Zach Collins, who is obviously good value at 5.5K without Wemby. So how are you feeling about Brow up top, and are you eating the Zach Collins chalk?
Not really going to eat that chalk. I think there's a lot to like at center, and he's
not even chalky.
If he is, I will not be on it. But even if he's not, I think he's kind of okay. I don't think he's a smash by any means. He played 26 minutes in a start the other night. If they keep it close, there's potential for more. I'm very skeptical they can keep it close against Oklahoma City, even without Holmgren. So Collins is okay, but far from my favorite value. AD is phenomenal. I'm still undecided on whether I would play AD and LeBron in the same lineup. I think you can because it's a pretty small slate and there's not a ton to pay up for beyond like Tatum or Shea. I guess we'll see about Luka. So probably would lean against playing them together, but AD is great. The Jazz get blocked more per game than any team in the league. That sets up pretty well for AD, of course. There's a lot to like on the cheap side at center. In addition to Collins, I'm kind of interested in Al Horford a little bit. I think the minutes could come up for him. He's played over 30 a few times recently. Matchup against Cleveland, they have a couple bigs. They need to match the size in theory. Horford could see 30-plus minutes at 4,800. I think projections might be a little bit under on him as of now. I don't hate that at 4,800. Wish he was power forward eligible, but he's not. So kind of is what it is. I don't mind Charles Bassey either as a punt for San Antonio, picking up backup minutes behind Collins. They could split them, 24 down the middle for each. And Bassey's 3,400, pretty good per minute guy historically, could get blowout run. I think that's a pretty interesting way to save money at center.
Yeah, it could be. I would imagine it's tough to feel great about OKC allowing the Spurs to hang around. Only other guy I'll mention, and forgive me if I missed him and you touched on him, Dario Saric. 4.7K. He actually is coming in with ownership, which is a little bit scary, but he's hit last 2 games, 30-plus fantasy points without Jokic out. Should start. Pretty versatile player. He actually can do a lot of things while he's out there. I do not mind it. The only thing I'm not super excited about is if he is really chalky. And he's only center eligible. So how do you feel about him?
Yeah, he's fine. I assume he's going to carry the ownership that Horford's not going to get. that's potentially why Collins isn't drawing a lot. Memphis without Edey, I guess you can consider Brandon Clark or Jay Huff. Both are under 4K. Both center only. I'd feel better about who starts, but for tournaments, I think that's decent enough. I prefer Lively to Gafford among the Mavs. Lively generally plays a few more minutes. He's only 4-4 against Oklahoma City, a team without any bigs beyond like Yves Missi and Daniel Tice. So pretty good spot for Lively, and he's super cheap. I think there's pretty easy payoff potential for that.
Yep, nothing wrong with that. Totally fair. All right, so let's wrap things up with our flag plant and overall strategy for the slate.
Well, I'm probably paying up for one of the Lakers per lineup. Not every single lineup, but most of them will have at least one of those Laker stars. If not, it's hard to game stack Boston, Cleveland because the good pieces are expensive, but getting at least one of those players on each side is not a bad tournament strategy. And then I will be limiting my number of cheap nets to a max of 2 per lineup.
Yeah, it's really funny because this is definitely a slate with a lot of blowout risk. I mean, the Dallas game, Spurs game, Lakers game, those 3 games for sure have some of the best values, some of the best studs, and those games are no guarantee to stay competitive through 4 quarters. So, I mean, we can pick our spots as far as like avoiding based off a blowout. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just going to play who I like the most. And right now, he's carrying ownership, but Anthony Davis looks like the play of the slate. Best projection. And he's not like going to be owned like a crazy amount because LeBron's going to carry ownership. Luka still exists. Tatum is there. LaMelo and SGA. There's options for everybody. I will say that SGA being 5% owned on this slate at only 10.6K is very, very interesting. He's probably my second favorite play of the slate after Anthony Davis. So, I mean, you got to find a way to get some solid plays in there that are not owned. And hopefully there's enough value that you can go get 2 studs on this slate. But I do not mind eating like the Denver chalk. I don't mind eating Jamal Murray chalk at 8.3 and some of those other plays. I think they look really, really good. Even though the matchup on the road with Memphis isn't the most appealing. But my actual strategy is going to be stacking the Lakers Jazz game to some degree. And I think the way I get different, the quickest way is by getting more exposure to the Jazz side than is humanly comfortable. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to go get Keontae George, who is not going to be owned, whereas Jordan Clarkson might be, and to go get Lowry instead of Collins. Now, I don't disagree as far as a ceiling perspective. Like if you're going to play the Jazz, it usually makes sense to play like Lowry instead of John Collins. I don't think you have to do that. Like you can play them together if you want to, but I agree that's probably the best way to go about it. Same with picking one of the Lakers guys. It's the usage is so concentrated for the Lakers that it's likely that if they do really well, that both of them will hit, but it's not super likely that they both will get like 70 fantasy points, right? One of them will get 50 and the other one will probably get 65 or something. And I think Brow is the best bet to get that done. All right, that is going to do it for us. Hopefully this helps you out in some way. If it does, smash that like button. Also consider subscribing to the channel so you get alerted to more videos just like this. Thanks for watching and good luck.